Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 7 of our reading of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson. Now, first of all, we're going to go over the copyright information, which I'm going to find in the book right now. Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, copyright 1963 by Cayuga Publications, Incorporated. Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited, copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions, Incorporated. All rights reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company, Incorporated, a Random House company. It gives the address there and all that information. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited, printed and bound in the United States of America, and this gives the Library of Congress information if you're into that kind of stuff. We have been reading The Ghost Town Ghost. Jim and Tolliver are headed to the Skeleton Mountains, and they're looking. It's a really creepy looking place. And they finally reach the Skeleton Mountains, so we're going to continue. The Giant's Cleft, Bert said. Kind of gets you the first time in, but you'll soon forget it. There's much else that's worse. From the cleft, the road widened and took them into a side passage that curved into a dead end. We'll leave the wagon here, stated Bert, where no one is apt to find it, though it won't matter if they do. From here, we go by pack horse or to Hidden Valley and make our headquarters there. The route proved a tricky one from the start. They loaded the 4 horses and led them up a rough incline that Jim thought was another dead end, but Bert knew differently. They reached a low, arched opening in the form of a natural tunnel and went through to another valley. More turns brought them to a hidden cleft between 2 weather-hewn pillars that Bert named the Twins. Always their course was upward until they found an opening that brought them into a natural bowl surrounded by a low rim of rock. There Jim gaped in utter astonishment. The bowl formed a small, fertile valley with plenty of grass for grazing, as well as grapevines, berry bushes, and even fruit trees. Near a low but steep cliff was an old hut with a crude fence extending from its corner to the rocky wall, where water oozed down in tiny rivulets that joined into a small stream. We can corral the horses over beside the cabin, declared Bert, and then get busy and patch it up. We can even plant some vegetables. I brought seeds along, figuring we'd be here long enough. But how can this valley be so fertile? Queried Jim. When the mountains themselves are practically a desert. Only they aren't a desert, returned Bert. There's enough rain hereabouts, but it comes all at once. The mountains have been gullied, so it sweeps right through them, except in a few places, like this valley, where the water gets impounded. Lots of prospectors worked out of here. You mean like the deacon? No, the deacon was a loner, like I told you. He kept watching everybody else. I guess nobody will ever know where he made his base. In the weeks that followed, Jim Gilbert came to know the Skeleton Mountains well, and he was impressed by their more fearful aspects. Bert Tolliver insisted that eyes were always watching in these parts, and Jim was inclined to believe it despite himself. Both were to learn why and how the Skeleton Mountains had taken so much human toll, regardless of outright murder or avenging ghosts, though it seemed almost as though the latter were to blame. Soon, however, they began to wonder if some protective power also functioned. While hunting for lost mines, they frequently crossed the markings of so-called treasure trails. These included crude drawings of arrows, snakes, and horses, all indicating the directions in which mines or treasure would be found. Other symbols meant to go back or follow a bend or look for special landmarks, but Bert sniffed at all such signs. If you owned a mine, Bert said to Jim, or had treasure hid somewhere, would you go putting up markers telling everybody else where to look? No, I wouldn't, conceded Jim. But why do you take so much interest in them if they don't lead you anywhere? Because maybe they were put there to lead you the wrong way, returned Bert cannily, or maybe lead you into trouble. There's one that you are supposed to follow. He indicated a pointed knife blade. He indicated a pointed knife blade painted at a rock, and maybe when you get there, it will cut your heart out. Let's follow it, suggested Jim with a grin, and find out. They were on horseback for this particular trip, and they soon came to a domed rock that bulged a few 100 feet above. High on the rock was a painted circle with lines extending from it like the rays of a rising sun. This means that there should be a mine shaft straight down below, declared Bert in a scoffing tone. Why don't you climb up and look down? No thanks, rejoined Jim, but I think I'll do a painting of it. Jim unlimbered easel and canvas, and beside his saddle set them up, and went to work. Bert, having nothing else to do, decided he would scale the rock, if only to prove that the sun symbol was wrong. When Bert finally reached the jutting rock just below the crag, Jim called up to him. Stay there, and I'll include you in the picture. Jim sketched Bert's figure, and then waved at him that he was finished, but as Bert started to resume his climb, Jim saw a slight motion in the rock above. He sprang to his feet, shouting, Bert, look up, it's a rock slide. Quick as a cat, Bert reversed his course and squirmed beneath the jutting rock, just as a mass of cracking stone tumbled down over it, raising a huge pile of dust as it swept down the face of the cliff. The avalanche carried the jutting rock with it, and Jim expected to see Bert's broken body at the base of the cliff when the dust cleared. Instead, a call caused Jim to look up, and there was Bert perched in a crevice, where he had wedged himself, letting the slide ride out beyond him. Soon, Bert made his way down to the base and declared, See what I mean, Jim? It was a booby trap, fixed so some fool like myself would go up and jar it loose. Thanks, Jim, for warning me. Bert looked at Jim's painting and said, Say, that's great. You had actually put me in it when the thing happened. Bert stopped, then shifted his gaze from canvas to cliff and back again. Funny thing, he said. The top of the cliff looks like a face in your painting, but the cliff itself doesn't. Kind of like the old deacon with the dome as his hat. I did get a face into it, admitted Jim, stepping back and scanning the canvas with half-closed eyes, but it was accidental. I've noticed this in my paintings, though. If something odd shows up in them, is generally traceable in the original scene. Then why doesn't the deacon's face show on the cliff now? Because it isn't the same as it was. Jim was studying the cliff as he spoke. The face was formed by the loose rocks that broke away and nearly took you with it. Maybe the deacon was looking out for you, Bert. Or for you more than me, Jim. You were smart enough not to go up there at all. I only hope he wasn't looking out for his mind. I hope that he wasn't looking out for his mind, too. What do you mean by that, Bert? Well, if it's at the foot of the cliff, it's covered so deep with loose rock that we would need 100 men to clear it by the end of the summer. But I don't think the mine is down there. Like I said, some of those signs are put up to trap you, and that goes in this case. Only the deacon helped us out. Only the deacon helped us out of it. Let's hope he stays on our side next time we're in trouble. Jim Gilbert made other paintings of key scenes while he and Bert Tolliver continued their exploration of the Skeleton Mountains, concentrating on the unmarked portions of Jim's map. Whether they went on horseback or on foot depended upon the distance to be covered, as well as the type of terrain. They were already into their second month when Bert suggested a hike over the brow of Hidden Valley to explore the vicinity of Crystal Point, which was an open area on the map. Jim took along brushes and canvas, and while Bert was probing the bed of a dry stream for traces of gold, probing the bed of a dry stream for traces of gold, Jim did a painting of Crystal Peak with low, blackish clouds gathering off beyond. He had finished when Bert came lumbering up from the stream, shaking his head and muttering that he'd had no luck, then glanced at Jim's canvas. Bert exclaimed, "I'm doggoned if you haven't done it again." "Done what, Bert?" "Put the old deacon into a picture. There he is, black hat and all. Sort of a profile, as you call it, made out of edges of those clouds. I wonder if they really look like that." Jim noted the resemblance that he had inadvertently worked into the cloud shape, but he shook his head. "They can't be the same now," he said, "because the clouds have kept on gathering since I finished the picture." "I'll say they have," exclaimed Bert, looking at the sky. "Those are storm clouds, and we better skedaddle back to the valley by the quickest way." He took a look at the map and traced with his finger. "That would be through Ledge Canyon. Let's go." As they jogged towards the canyon, Bert had more to say. "Believe me, Jim," he insisted, "this is another warning from the deacon. He's on our side, or his ghost is, because when a storm hits those mountains, you're really in for it, but in the canyon, we'll be protected from the wind and rain." Bert was right. The steep walls and narrow gap at the canyon top provided shelter when the storm broke. They paused there on a slight slope well down the canyon, and Bert pointed up to a streak of rock that showed white in the thickening darkness. "That's the ledge they named this canyon after. Looks like a ghost. Looks kind of ghostly up there, don't it? For my money, that is the spookiest place in these mountains." Bert was interrupted by a distant moan and grew suddenly into an echoing howl. With it, the chill of a ghostly breeze swept through the canyon. Bert shoved Jim up the rough face of the cliff and shouted above the fearful echo, "Keep climbing and don't stop until you reach the ledge." There were some 20 feet up from the canyon floor when a whitish shape appeared at the upper end and swelled up to a fantastic size as it approached with a deafening roar. Momentarily, Jim thought that he was viewing a gigantic ghost until he recognized it as the crest of a mighty flood tide. The heavens had opened with a deluge, and all the water from the cloudburst was funneling down this canyon in an increasing wave. By the time the flood arrived in full, Bert had climbed another 20 feet to the ledge and was leaning down with extended hand. He grabbed the canvas that Jim still carried, even though it had impeded him. Then Bert hauled Jim himself up to the safety of the narrow projection. By now, loose chunks of rock were dropping from the canyon walls into the torrent that would have battered Jim and Bert into eternity. But they let it catch up with them. Now the rain was coming through the canyon in a devastating sheet, with wind strong enough to whip them from their precarious perch. But Bert, by then, had found a gap in the inner wall of the ledge. He dragged Jim into its shoulder, and they were both amazed to find that it opened into a snug cave. Bert used a flashlight to study the walls. Where was I? These caves have been hand-hewn, exclaimed Bert. This is where the deacon must have ducked whenever he was seen around Ledge Canyon. Everybody thought he skinned out the other end ahead of them, but all the while he was living up here behind a ledge that nobody ever climbed to take a look at. We wouldn't have either, agreed Jim, if you hadn't heard those floodwaters coming and known what they were. Yeah, and they wouldn't have come this way if the deacon's ghost hadn't warned us by cramming itself into another one of your pictures. You really believe that, Bert? I sure do, considering that we've wound up high and dry in the deacon's own hideaway. Why we wouldn't have even made it if we hadn't stumbled into footholds, and he must have hacked into the rock so neat-like that I never noticed him before. That's why our climb was so easy. Jim couldn't dispute that argument, so he didn't try. Soon the roaring water had run its course, so Jim and Bert came from the cave and made their way down from the ledge, finding that the footholds were the very sort that Bert claimed. An hour later, they were back in Hidden Valley, which had escaped much of the storm, and they found the horses unharmed. They had brought supplies for a good 3 months, which was fortunate, as they still were searching for the deacon's mine when that period was nearly ended. Bert had planted corn and other vegetables, much to Jim's amusement, but now they had been harvested and were providing a welcome change from a canned and dried food diet. Bert finally suggested an expedition beyond Gray Dune and into the southern portion of the range. They took all 4 horses, riding 2 and using the other pair as pack horses, but at times the going became so rough that they divided the packs among the horses and led them all. Their gold hunting technique was simple but tedious. They worked their way down what Bert termed a likely-looking mountain stream, panned for gold all the way. As more streams joined the original one, the task became bigger, and when they reached the valley 2,000 feet below, they were dealing with a small river. But Bert insisted that they keep at it, and finally, when they were working in a shoal of sand, their pans came up with a few gold flakes. Jim became enthusiastic, only to be curbed by Bert. Not enough, declared Bert. Now we've got to work upriver and find out which stream these flakes washed down from. In working back up, they gave special care to little pools and rocky pockets where small streams joined the large one. They were well up to the headwaters and running out of supplies as well as patience when their pans showed better results, and Bert was sure they had found the real gold-bearing tributary. His confidence increased as they continued up it. I'll keep panning, Bert told Jim, while you start painting. Most galoots would make a gold strike never can describe the place just right or even remember what it looks like when they go to find it again. They get kind of overexcited, I reckon, so while I'm getting warm, you keep cool and get that picture done. Then we'll know where we are for sure. Oddly, Jim himself was nervous. He stalked about, unable to find the right spot. He had the feeling that eyes were watching him from the rocks above. As a result, he kept glancing over his shoulder every time he was about to paint. He finally settled for a view that showed a high rock at the right and a lesser slope to the left, with Bert working upstream in between. When he finished the painting, Jim called to Bert, who couldn't hear him above the rushing water, so Jim took the canvas down and showed it to Bert, who let out a yippee just as Jim arrived. We've got it, Jim, shouted Bert. It's panned out like I hoped. There's gold close by and plenty of it. Now, if we only knew which way to look. Bert stopped, more interested in Jim's painting than in the gleaming find that he himself had made. The deacon, he said in an odd tone. You've got him in the picture again. See how his face shows on that big rock looking down across the gulch? Jim saw it too and was pleased, for this was one picture that they could check by the original scene. They did so and found that Jim's brush had captured the actual rock formation that resembled a staring face. The hollows that represented eyes were fixed on the slope opposite, so Bert decided to explore that sector first. If it's good enough for the deacon, he declared, it's sure good enough for me. Directly up the slope, Bert found traces of a dry gully down which the gold could have washed. He followed the gully up to some chunky rocks which looked as though they had been cemented in place. Bert started hacking away with a pickaxe and told Jim to get another, but before Jim could get one, there was a crash and Bert disappeared in the dust of flying rock and the splinter of wooden timbers beneath. Jim rushed to the mouth of the shaft and heard Bert's voice come up from a dozen feet below. Don't bother about the pickaxe, bring a lantern instead. Soon Jim joined Bert in the shaft and found him brushing himself off with no serious hurts. Here, the shaft began to gradually descend beneath the slope. They followed to the end where the lantern glow showed chunks of yellow streaks, quartz, projecting from the wall. Bert hammered off some pieces and studied them closely. Gold, all right, he declared. This must be the deacon's diggings, but it goes back to the Spanish days. If we don't find other shafts or tunnels around here, we can sink some ourselves. We struck it rich, Jim. By daylight, the samples impressed Bert even more than. By daylight, the samples impressed Bert even more. That night, the partners sat around their campfire, happily discussing the future. Jim went to sleep soon after they turned in, but he awoke at fitful intervals, and always he saw Bert moving about, sometimes tending the horses, at others stalking to and fro the mine shaft to make sure it was still there. At breakfast, Bert looked haggard and worried, scarcely listening to Jim's suggestions that they should go back to Hidden Valley and bring down all the remaining supplies to make this their new permanent base. Then suddenly Bert halted Jim's discourse with an abrupt objection. Listen, Jim, we've got to go our separate ways right now. Today, we're still partners, you understand, but I want you to go and put in our claim while I stay here and work the mine. When you come back, bring a crew with you. Then we'll really be in business, understand? Sure, Bert. Why can't we work together? Because we've got too big a secret for just the pair of us. You know what happened in these mountains. Partners turn on one another, and that's the end of it. Each wants what the other has got. He wants all for himself. The whole kit and caboodle. That's the way it goes. But that couldn't happen to us. Look how we've gotten along. Sure, it's all for fun, pard, as long as you're just hoping for a strike. But when you've hit it, or even think you're going to hit it, you always playing for keeps. That's human nature. You might just call it inhuman nature, Bert. Why not? It's all one and the same. You get a crazy idea and you stick to it, like the mule that won't budge or the bronco that wants to buck. Critters show it and give themselves away, but humans nurse it like a grudge. There couldn't be a grudge between us, Bert. Couldn't there? Nah. Bert brought a wad of tobacco from his pocket and bit off a chaw. I've had a grudge against everybody in Topaz City, and with good reason, and the way they've treated me. Now that I'm rich, I'd like to take it out on those galoots. So last night I began saying to myself, how is this Jim Gilbert any different from those mavericks? And then I answered, Bert, you varmint. He grub-staked you and took you as a partner. Then I said, sure, he took me 'cause he couldn't get nobody else he could trust. That's how everybody else has always treated Bert Tolliver. And do you know what that made me think? No, snapped Jim a bit angrily, but I'd like to know. It made me think that here was the first chance I ever had to cross up a guy before he could turn around and do me dirt. Believe me, you and I are real pals, Jim, because if we weren't, I wouldn't have done you in I would have because if we weren't, I would have done you in last night. For real. Night. I was tempted that much. Maybe if it grows on me, I won't be able to hold off. And from the way you're talking, Bert, that might go for me. You're beginning to get my dander up. So what's our next move? Just this. You saddle up one of the horses. The strongest one is Lubeck. So take him and go down to the foot of the mountain and ride due west across the desert and straight ahead. You'll see the lower end of another range, the Ragged Mountains. They are called. Keep going and you'll come to the town of Monad. That's the county seat where you register our claim. How far is it across the desert, Bert? 3 days' ride at most, with water holes along the way. Just keep straight for the low end of the mountain, and you can't miss. But whatever you do, don't turn northward. Why not? Jim asked. Because that's where you'll see mirages. Nice blue lakes and green woods, sometimes even towns. The mountains look so far away when the mirages look so close. They fool you. But it's twice as far up the desert as it is across. People who head north are never heard from again. Okay. We've been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.